Hello, this is The Green Report, Rappler's show on the environment and the stories of people whose decisions impact the world around us. I'm Iya Gozum.
And I'm G. Geronimo.
And we're finally over the marathon coverage of COP29, the global climate negotiations that happened in Azerbaijan. And now it's time to talk about it, debrief over what happened.
Yes.
G, are you ready for this debriefing?
Para sa atin, no?
Para
More
sa
than the
atin
audience.
talaga,
But also for the audience,
Yeah.
kung hindi nyo nasundan yung 2 weeks, and it's understandable because 2 weeks is a very long time to follow these climate talks that could get so very technical.
Right.
But we did it so you didn't have to.
And hindi lang siya a matter of parang 2 weeks kung sa Pilipinas, kung from the Philippines mo siya minomonitor and
Yes.
cover. You have to stay up late.
Yeah.
Kasi 4 hours ahead tayo.
Tayo.
Tama.
Oo.
4 hours ahead tayo than Baku.
Yes.
So, the big question, what do we make of the finance deal that was hammered out in COP? The $300 billion NGQC.
So, siguro explain muna natin sa audience what the NCQG is.
Okay.
So, the main agenda of the COP29 or climate talks this year is they wanted to agree on a new climate finance deal. Kasi, given inflation, masyado nang maliit yung supposedly
In the
na-achieve
very
na
beginning,
nila yung 100 billion a year na they agreed on 2009 pa. So that's 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And in 2009, they agreed on $100 billion finance goal by 2020, which they didn't achieve actually by 2020. They achieved 2022.
Belatedly.
Yes. So this COP, they really dubbed it as a finance COP because they wanted to agree on a new deal.
Right.
And this new deal, in the context of loss and damage being part of the talks so they, understandably, the developing countries are demanding a huge amount. They wanted trillions. 1.3 per year. Per year by 2035, which is 11 years.
Detail here is that yung $100 billion supposedly should be funded by the developed countries. Because the idea is, yung mga big polluters, yung nag-cause or nag-exacerbate ng climate crisis na hinaharap natin ngayon, and yung impacts ay nararamdaman ng mga vulnerable countries, dapat sila yung magbayad per hour.
So, yun yung inabangan natin the whole week.
Yeah.
And usually, these negotiating texts come out on the second week. So, second week, a few days before the COP ended, doon na nagkaroon talaga ng drama, kumbaga.
Yes.
Yung unang lumabas na negotiating texts,
It has no number.
it has no number. Iya. Anong
Thoughts? No number? Yun ang headline ko. Still no number. So, it was, delegates and observers of COP29, parang sabi nila, hindi na surprising na walang number na inilabas dun sa first draft. But that we're seeing that at this time, I think that was Thursday. So parang Thursday or Wednesday. So parang 2 days na lang before matapos. Yung following the original schedule of COP. Matapos. Yun yung draft na nilabas nila, no number. Yun yung sinasabi nila, yun yung pinaka-importante.
Yun yung main agenda.
Yes, I mean, aside pa sa other important things ng mechanism, na saan yung source ng fund na yan, syempre big questions din yun. Pero syempre, unang-una sa lahat, parang magkano yung ibibigay. So, civil society is demanding, and of course, other developing nations, they're demanding at least 1.3 trillion per year para ma-fund yung mitigation, yung adaptation, and yung loss and damage costs. So, itong 1.3 na to, they did not come up with this from thin air. So, base dun sa mga nationally determined contribution plans ng mga bansa, I think 98 parties submitted that around 5 to 6 trillion yung kailangan ng mga bansa para ma-mitigate nila and ma-reduce nila yung greenhouse gas emissions nila. So, we're really talking about trillions worth of dollars here. So, nung lumabas after that first draft na walang number, and then lumabas the next day, the next day, 24 or more than 24 hours. Medyo nagbo-blur yung
actually, yung new amount, siguro a day before the end of the talk.
Yes, so, tama. Kaya, very anxious din yung mga tao. So, nung lumabas yung 250 billion, ayun, doon na nag-walk out na yung mga tao sa COP, and then they held press conferences. Basically, very, very, very disappointing.
Kasi imagine if they're going from 1.3 to 250, that's a quarter.
Yeah.
Less than a quarter of what they're asking for. So talagang strong words from the civil society groups. And even delegates from the developing countries talaga. Parang
they called it insulting.
Yeah, they called it insultingly low.
Yeah.
So, yun. So, from 250, dinagkaroon na tayo ng amount from 250. And then, we were expecting, it was scheduled to end on Friday. But knowing what we know of COP coverages, it really extends. Yeah, it goes over time. And because this is a climate finance agreement, I was really expecting na, actually, I was expecting walang deal. Sobrang negative. Pero it really went over time, na meron even other delegates, parang, inaabangan nila kung mag-over, will it go over yung ibang mga COP talaga na nag-overtime. So, that means also for us, waiting kung ano yung magic number that will come out. Hours before, nilabas na nila yung draft negotiating text. Actually, hindi na siya negotiating text, decision text na siya. So, ibig sabihin, either i-adopt na lang or hindi ng nations. And prior to that, nagkaroon na rin ng reports that the big countries like EU, Australia, US, they were willing to raise it to 300.
Yes.
300.
Yeah. From 250
to 300. So parang yun. So yun na rin yung ina-expect din natin na number going into the final to the COP plenary. And then finally at the COP plenary, actually ito yung nag-extend talaga into dito sa Pilipinas, umabot ng siguro around 6 a.m. ng Sunday, yes. So if that's 2 a.m. their time, 3 a.m. their time. So, ibig sabihin, umabot ng ganong kalit before they really gavelled a decision. And when you watch the videos, we have that on our YouTube page. When you watch that decision, sobrang bilis. Talagang, as in, binasa niya lang yun. Usually, ka nagpo-pause kasi yung COP29 president para titingnan niya muna kung meron bang umaalma. Kung meron bang ano. Pero, surprisingly, dun talaga sa decision na yun, ang bilis. Like, pagkabasa niya nung draft decision, ginabel na niya. So, ibig sabihin nun, adopted na. And, so, received by such a standing ovation, palakpakan, sobrang saya ng ano. But, as quickly as that standing ovation, the developing countries rather, nag-intervention na sila. I think Cuba went first and then India. And India really had very strong words. As in, to say that we do not support this text. We do not, and in COP climate talks, consensus is very important. So,
basically, COP is ang foundation naman niya talaga is consensus.
It's consensus.
Because it's not, hindi naman legally binding yung nagiging decision.
Correct.
So it's just voluntary cooperation.
So consensus being that dapat any text, kailangan all countries agree to it. So that's why it's going into overtime. That's why there's so many negotiations going into. And India's request before it was decided, it was adopted, was that they were given time to make a speech, to make a statement. Whether that statement is to say na they don't support it, siguro we will never know kasi na-adopt na siya bago pa nag-manifest. And then, so many developing countries followed suit. And then they were agreeing to India na, yes, we agree that we do not support this text because, yun nga, $300 billion a year, that's what we're going to get. By 2035, in the next decade. Yun lang ang kinumit ng wealthy nations to help developing countries like the Philippines for their climate action.
But to be clear, the $1.3 trillion na yung figure na yon na nire-raise ng mga developing countries and civil society, it also appears on the text, on both texts, on the second draft and then the final decision. And doon pa tayo naguluhan kasi we're waiting for the texts. Tapos as reporters, syempre parang we have to break it agad kapag lumabas. So you look for the number, 'di ba? Tapos parang okay, may 1.3 trillion dollars.
Actually, naalala ko, yun yung una kong sinabi sa'yo. Wait,
diba?
1.3.
1.3 trillion. So parang it was a good news pa nga eh. Parang it was a good news pa. Tapos when you read it, pag binasa mo na talaga siya, mauuna lang yung paragraph ng 1.3 trillion and then makikita mo it's funding that will come from all actors. So private, public,
even developing
sectors, even developing countries. Banks, diba, financial institutions, and then dun sa baba, $250 billion coming from developed countries. Parang no, yun yung number, yun yung number na yun.
And even that number still comes from different sources. Hindi lang sa public finance.
Mobilized lang siya ng developed countries. And that's one of the contentions din ng mga delegates doon in terms of the mechanisms of this funding kasi they wanted it to be grants or grants equivalent. Basically, the way we simply understand it, na developed countries give this money to developing countries.
Yeah.
But instead, majority of them, at least dun sa experience natin sa $100 billion, came in the form of loans. And that's another concern kasi it's exacerbating the debt crisis of these poor nations.
Right. And you remember when COP started, ang sinabi ni UN Climate Chief Simon Steele is that this is not charity.
Yeah.
And paulit-ulit tong sinasabi ng mga advocates at COP. Sinasabi nila na we are not begging. This is what's due us.
Yeah, that's Lady. We're not begging. That's Filipino
which
climate
leads us
activist
to that. Ano yung initial reaction ng CSOs, especially the Philippine
on the second
civil
draft,
society.
the 250.
Yes.
Okay, so this is lagi ka tong binibring up. This is my favorite part. Kasi nung lumabas yung number, so of course we're expecting na meron mga urgent press cons, statements coming from different groups. So nagpa-press con yung civil society. Kasama doon, 2 Filipino climate activists, si Jerry Arances from Center of Energy, Ecology and Development, and then Lidi Nakpil from Asian People's Movement. And Lidi Nakpil has a way with words. She's very sharp. So after she talked in that press con, siya yung huling nagsalita. Parang the moderator asked the public or yung audience na parang, do you have any questions? Tapos parang tahimik lang sila.
After magsalita ni Lidi.
After magsalita ni Lidi. So I think it's a mixture of pati yung mga journalists in the room, they're kind of flabbergasted by the number na pinresent ng COP29 presidency. And also, I think it was an emotional moment sa both for the media, for civil society, for leaders in developing countries. Na parang ito lang yung number.
Because at this point, they've already been talking for days, weeks.
Yes.
Di ba? So, you would imagine na pagod na, di ba?
Saka parang for the 250 billion figure to come out on Thursday, so that's second to the last day of COP. Parang ang laki nung ihahakbang to the trillion, to the at least 1 trillion that we need. And you have very, very, very little time to negotiate. So parang realistically, hindi mo na yun.
Paano mo na yun maninegotiate?
Right,
And Lidi's quote there, this is worse than what we expected would be the worst.
Yeah.
So parang lusak na to ng in-expect natin. And that's a situation. But in the end, $300 billion prevailed. Anong reaction ng Philippine civil society to 300?
Of course, disappointment. It's the same. It's the same thing. It's they're disappointed. They're disappointed. But since wala nang magagawa, parang okay, looking forward to Belém, Brazil. Brazil for COP30, parang ano na lang yung mga dapat natin i-ensure. But it's not just the number that they're disappointed with, it's the source of funding, it's the mechanism for funding. So,
ano ba yung nasa language ng text ng climate finance goal? How do you scrutinize what is the best or a mediocre number or finance goal for wealthy nations?
Well, syempre, first, i-compare mo siya sa kung ano ba yung sinasabi ng mga nangangailangan ng pera, kung magkano yung kailangan nila. And of course, kung sobrang laki ng difference, then ibig sabihin may mali. And then if that funding that's supposed to help us weather the impacts of climate change and move away from fossil fuels incurs us more debt, parang there's a structural problem here. And that's what we're seeing from the statements from civil society.
Right. Oh. So climate finance pa lang yan, di ba?
Yeah.
When it comes, balik tayo sa Philippines. Of course, the Philippines, actually start pa lang ng COP, meron na agad big role ang Philippines. Minention na siya agad because we are the host of the Loss and Damage Fund Board.
Yeah.
And in the first week, our Environment Secretary was there to launch, to sign an agreement.
The host country agreement.
Yeah. So it just formalizes.
Yes.
Right. So what does that mean for us going into December, which is the first meeting of the board here in the Philippines? What will happen?
So, nakuha natin yung duty to host the Loss and Damage Fund Board June, July, mid-year. And then, after that, nag-legislate na ng batas for this board to operate here in the Philippines. So, napasa na yon agad coming into this COP. So, yun na yung final step. And then after that, it's supposed to be fully operational already. So, ang sabi rin ng COP29 presidency nung before Loizaga signed the agreement is that meron nang ready for disbursement na funds. So, that's what we're going to expect ngayon coming into December kung kailan magkakaroon ng, I think that's their 4th meeting ng board. So, yun ang I think yun yung early win ng Pilipinas, something concrete.
And anong role?
We're taking away from COP.
Right. And so, what we're going to monitor now or look forward to is ano yung magiging role talaga ng Pilipinas in this? Hosting the board here, what does that mean for us as a developing country, as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world?
Yeah.
Other than being mentioned, okay, tayo yung host, what benefits will we get from this hosting or responsibilities?
Benefits, I'm not so sure with benefits, but it's more about the Philippines having a more pronounced role in international climate negotiations, like cementing our place as a leader in these kinds of talks, in these agreements. And merong sinabi si Environment Secretary Loizaga nung nag-sign siya ng agreement, when she's delivering the message from President Marcos, na parang the Philippines daw is parang the test case of the Loss and Damage Fund. Parang we know this experience so much. Going into COP, parang naka 6 tropical cyclones tayo. So for a country like the Philippines to lead this fund, to lead disbursement then of this fund, to be one of the leaders in the disbursement of this fund would help other nations. So I think it's more not so much about benefiting the Philippines, but giving parang medyo pangit, but giving more voice, I think, to vulnerable countries. So I think it makes a difference. Like for example, if a developed country would host, diba, this kind of fund that only vulnerable countries would need, diba?
It's also the leadership role that more and more developing countries are taking in this climate talks. And I think that's important na because loss and damage is now part of the conversation. And the Philippines has always been part of that conversation, even before loss and damage was adopted. That the fund was created, the host was determined. We've always been a champion of including loss and damage in the discussions for climate change and the climate crisis. So being the host of that fund, I think is hopefully hindi lang siya symbolic, but we really take this opportunity to be a leader and to lead and to show the developed countries how these negotiations or how this should go. Well, going now into another specific discussion in COP29. Well, actually, hindi nga siya na-discuss. One of the main takeaways from last year, it was even called a historic decision, was that there was language in the text in last year's decision to transition away from fossil fuel, and that alam ko na pag-usapan natin to sa Green Report natin last year. But in this year, wala siya, hindi siya napag-usapan, or like walang any progress in that language. And
wait, which language?
Yun, to transition away from fossil fuel. Walang anything. I mean, it's still, I guess it's still there, but given the COP28 text was adopted. But other than that, walang progress in this COP on how to transition away from fossil fuel. And
well, supposedly the how is yung pera.
Well, yun nga. So pero I mean even hindi lang the pera, but also, the specific, they've always wanted a specific language on phasing out, like even by when do you transition away from. Pero itong COP29 is very would you say it's very controversial in that the host is ayaw na pala nilang matawag na na petrostate.
It was a very bitter climate summit.
And also the over 1,700 lobbyists from fossil fuel industry were present at COP. And by the end of there are reports that Saudi Arabia, a delegate from Saudi Arabia tried to, sabi ko, paano kaya yun? It tried to edit the negotiating
there are reports
text.
Nga that Saudi Arabia is stalling on that commitment that they made in COP28. So ano nga that leads us to the next question. Parang if we have those countries stalling the process and looking at next year when Donald Trump is US president, who is threatening to withdraw from the Paris Agreement and from the UNFCCC, parang is COP still
relevant?
Yes. Is it time for what, a new format, a new way of doing things?
Actually, on the second week of COP, diba, like yung mga climate leaders mismo, like former UN chief Ban Ki-moon, the former UNFCCC chief, they had an open letter for the United Nations, saying that the COP process actually needs reform. And ito yung mga sinasabi na ng mga climate activists like Greta na hindi na uma-attend sa COP. Kasi parang, okay, mag-speech na naman yung mga leaders.
Isip ko sino? Greta Thunberg. Okay.
Sino ba?
Kasi parang Greta yung Greta Thunberg.
Diba? Hindi na sila ma-attend sa COP because they think, ayan na naman.
And many leaders skipped the COP this year.
Actually, this year, notable talaga. Sobrang daming nag-skip.
Si Jinping.
Macron, hindi sila umattend. The big
Lula is
names,
not there.
Yes, the big names, the big leaders did not attend COP29. I don't know, dahil ba nire-reserve ba nila yung energy nila for COP30?
Maybe.
Pero visibly absent talaga yung biggest leaders in this COP. And yun, so there are those calls for a COP reform kasi we've been doing this for 29 years now. And I think may fatigue na din na, okay, another climate talk. And so little progress is made. But on the other hand, climate change is, parang the pace of the talks are not attuned with the pace of climate change. Like,
With the
nauunahan na
urgency-
talaga
with the
tayo.
urgency that
Yes.
we need. I agree with that, but also sometimes I can't help but still be odd that people from all over the world would fly into one place. Carbon emissions would fly into one place to gather and talk about this problem. Parang for an agreement that is not legally binding, that hinges so much on voluntary cooperation. Even with the election of Donald Trump, na nakakatakot kasi natin na mag-withdraw yung US sa Paris Agreement, it just shows how fragile it is. And to still see countries and civil society show up, parang, that's still, it's still...
They still believe in the process.
Incredible.
Even though how flawed it is,
Yeah.
they think that the urgency calls for it.
Yeah.
Parang, because if you don't go to these talks, saan kayo mag-uusap-usap pa? And it's a very global problem. And this is the main avenue, the main platform for that.
Yeah.
So hindi naman sa wala kang choice, but this is the perfect time to bring your voice to the table. And actually, yun nga, everyone has a seat on the table, supposedly. But I think meron namang valid naman yung calls for reforms, not to scrap the talks, not to scrap the, but to look into the processes. Sino yung mga nag-host? Sunod-sunod from Egypt to Dubai to Azerbaijan. Parang maybe we should look into who are leading these talks and what does that mean for the process?
Right.
How does it limit what is achieved in every COP? Diba? Actually, isa yun sa mga calls na parang look at the host, look at who's hosting the past So I think the United Nations really has to have a hard look on its processes and see where we can improve. Going into COP30, which is they call the COP of the COPs, tama ba?
Turnaround COP. Ang
No,
sabi
yun,
ni Lula.
basta parang it's the main COP supposedly.
And also, I think the more na mas nagiging contentious yung climate talks and the more na kina-question yung mga tao yung relevance ng climate summit na to, the more na mas kailangan siyang i-cover ng journalists.
Yeah.
Yes, because we have to keep track, we have to keep track on what's happening. Siyempre, we have to analyze what's really being accomplished here and thus informing us of the relevance of these summits. Kasi hindi naman, siyempre, pwedeng basta na lang natin sabihin na it's not relevant anymore. Parang we have to look into it, look at what we have, and look at what we still can do. And journalists can do that.
Right. And based on our experience, I guess, the more you cover it, the more you understand the nuances of each COP. You understand the urgency. So I think every journalist, every environment journalist, or anyone who's interested in the environmental issues should really look into this. Should really consider covering COP29 or the COP climate talks, because it really gives you how the the global stage is when it comes to climate talks. Parang papaano siya nag-work. Parang just the simple na magkakaiba yan ng mga languages, but for some reason we agree on a no matter how watered down it is, but you agree to a specific text, or
agreements tend to be very, very technical. So you have to have a lot of people who would write this language, these words, over and over and over again, so that it becomes normal, diba?
So
like NCQG, nalilito pa rin ako. New collective quantified goal for climate finance. NCQG. Hindi kasi siya nag-roll off the tongue.
So going into COP30, so sabi mo nga turnaround. Bakit turnaround? Because the NDCs are expected.
So yun yung expect natin sa COP30 kasi by February next year, deadline na ng pag-revise ng new NDC. So for people who are not yet familiar with the idea, the concept of NDCs are nationally determined contributions. So every party to the Paris Agreement, they would set targets kung how much yung ibabawas nila sa emissions nila. So, all countries are supposed to submit those targets. And then, of course, follow through. So, makikita natin doon kailan yung target na maging net zero na yung mga bansa. Ayun. And then, following those targets, ano yung plano, ano yung roadmap to actually follow through on those targets. So, yun yung makikita natin sa Brazil. And for me, exciting yung Brazil kasi it's in Brazil. It's in the Amazon, right. 'Di ba? It's the leader of Brazil is a socialist. So, let's see what's going to be different.
And the Amazon, why Amazon is important, it's really one of the pinoprotektahang mga rainforests in the world, but also very, very vulnerable to climate change. So, to have a gathering there, di ko alam kung okay ba yun. Sobrang dami magpa-fly into Amazon next year.
Amazon ba?
Hindi, syempre sa
well, yeah.
But you know, it's in Brazil. And also, to have, parang to break the combo na okay, hindi na petro
oil state. Yeah.
Hindi na oil state yung
asterisk.
What does that mean for the negotiating, the developing countries? The CSOs? There's always been a closing civic space for CSOs at COPs. Yeah. But anong different for Brazil? And for the Philippines, anong NDCs ang i-commit natin?
Right.
So we'll also have to...
And then, of course, progress sa loss and damage. And it would be exciting when, we're expecting that US will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Parang to have a leader like Lula, who's very progressive, yung contrast nun to the US president at that time. So,
well, but by that time,
who
knows kung ano nang meron sa Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
Kung part pa ang US ng Paris Agreement.
So if you would have like one personal takeaway from COP29. Ako
Sige, ikaw muna.
We know that climate change is a universal issue. Pero following these talks, mas na-appreciate mo yung universality ng not just the issue but also the movement. Parang when the language of Philippine civil society is the same as the language of civil society members in other developing countries. Parang you would feel the solidarity. Ay, well,
so hopeful, always, Iya. Ako, actually, going to COP, siguro, wala din ako masyadong expectations. Because of the hosting, and maybe because of our past experiences with, So, medyo, in that regard, medyo mas jaded ako din.
Yeah.
And true enough, they met my expectations. Pero what the process shows me is that no matter how slow it really is, and in reality, mas ramdam mo yon during the last 2 weeks. Kung gaano kabagal yung pace ng even agreement. So imagine kung agreeing pa lang on the text is so slow.
Yeah.
Paano pa kaya yung implementation, di ba? But yun nga, yung sinabi mo kanina that people gathering in one place, all these side events, all these platforms, all this venue to hear the young farmers, merong mga Filipino farmers who were there. So ibig sabihin, it's not just our Philippine delegates that represent us in these talks, but also the climate advocates who have been monitoring this year-long. Hindi lang sila active during climate.
And year after year.
Yes, and year after year, yes.
They're there.
So, I think in that regard, that there are still groups willing to, be disappointed year in and year out, but still go to these talks. That gives us siguro another, not hope, I would not call it hope, but more of like a fuel to go on.
Kasi, grit.
Yes, na parang, they will keep going, so we will keep covering.
Yeah.
We will keep standing guard. Pero we will keep, calling out what we think is, what should be covered, and ano ba dapat yung, what we think should, na deserve ng mga developing countries like us. And in the context of yun nga, going into COP, merong 6 tropical cyclones, we really feel climate change. It's
a lived reality.
It's a lived reality for us. So, no matter how tiring that those weeks are, I think for us it's more a need. Like, it's really necessary for us to cover these talks.
And we end with that romantic note, even though sinasabi mo na hindi ka idealist. For more news and updates, join our Environment and Science channel on the Rappler Communities app. You can also download the app on your phones. It's available on iOS and Android. Or you can also visit communities.rappler.com. Thank you for listening to us. Hanggang sa susunod na episode. Bye!
Bye!